Hi, my name is Mary Thornton, and I'm the professor of trumpet and chair of the music department at Texas A&M University Corpus Christi.
What led you to choose the trumpet and a career in music?
For me, it was a pretty typical story. I had done a little bit of piano lessons as a small kid. My dad insisted. I didn't like piano at all. I hated it. And so by the time fifth grade rolled around, I was looking for any reason not to take piano lessons anymore. And so that's when the middle schools started coming around to the elementary schools and saying, you can be in band. What instrument do you want to play? And I didn't really have a strong preference. I just knew I needed to pick something so I wouldn't have to take piano lessons anymore. But it was about the same time that the Star Wars movie came out, the original Star Wars. And I remember hearing the music and thinking, oh, the trumpet is amazing. You know, those John Williams soundtracks in the 70s were just game changers, I think, for trumpet players. And so I said to my folks, I think trumpet is what I want to do. And the band director at the middle school was encouraging. He seemed to think I'd be able to do it. And so we just rented a cornet from the little music shop downtown. I'm from Oshkosh, Wisconsin, which is sort of a small town, and this little music shop was next door to my mom's office. And so it was really convenient. And that's how that all started with trumpet. Now, the question of when do you decide to make a career out of it? When I was coming up towards the end of high school, trumpet had always been something that I was pretty good at. And I was thinking about going into music, but I just couldn't decide. My mom, she wanted me to do whatever I wanted to do. I didn't have any of the stuff I see in a lot of parents now, where it's kind of like, oh, I don't know about music. You're not going to be able to make a living, blah, blah, blah. My mom back in the day was just kind of like, whatever you want to do is fine. My dad had died while I was young. So she said, whatever school you get into, we'll make it work. And so that was very optimistic on her part, because I proceeded to audition at like Northwestern and Rice and some schools on the East Coast. And I had narrowed it down, and there's a conservatory in Appleton, Wisconsin, not far away, called at Lawrence University, and I had auditioned there. And at that point in time, Rice was a real bargain for school. It still is, in terms of their packages and stuff. But I got into Rice. My high school trumpet teacher, I'd started taking trumpet lessons during high school, kind of off and on, and she had happened to have gone to Rice as well. And so she's the one that told me about it. It was really twofold there, because I got accepted as just, a regular student as well. I was thinking about English also as a major, but it was very soon after I arrived at campus that I realized I was going to have to pick one or the other. And I picked music, and I never looked back. And I've been quite happy most of the time having chosen it. So I always knew I'd be in music, and I always knew I wanted to be a trumpet player, and I am all of those things. But the shape that has taken over the years is different than what you imagine heading out. And I think it's important to allow for that sort of flexibility and not feel disappointed in yourself or in the choices you've made in pursuit of whatever that pristine goal was when you first started out. I think as long as you're happy and you're making music in a way that is fulfilling, you need to allow yourself to be flexible in how things turn out.
Thank you for sharing that. It's a wonderful story. I'd love to hear now a little bit about the topic you presented at IWBC. So, can you share what your presentation was and some of the key points from that lecture?
So I gave a session on Suzuki trumpet with my friend Dan Adadio, who also teaches at the Hart School. So he was in the neighborhood for this conference, and we had done some Suzuki teacher training together. And so I thought, oh, this would be a perfect opportunity for us, to be able to have a live student, one of his Suzuki students, there with us, and them not having to travel and do that. So from a practical standpoint, it was just a really great opportunity to do this session. In terms of Suzuki trumpet in general, it's relatively new. And there's sort of a basic timeline and sort of people that have been really important in its development so far. So I'll just kind of mention a few of those and then how I got into it. So Anne-Marie Sundberg is a Swedish-based trumpet player who decided that Suzuki methodology and pedagogy would be as applicable to trumpet as to any other instrument for which it has traditionally been employed. So Anne Marie went through the process of developing the pedagogy, getting trumpet into the Suzuki associations in Europe and America, and is working on getting it into the Suzuki associations in the other parts of the globe. So when she first started working on getting it into the Americas and the Suzuki Association of America, that means you're developing that pedagogy that string players are familiar with, Suzuki Book 1, Suzuki Book 2, but for trumpet. It has since expanded to some other brass instruments, but Anne Marie's focus was trumpet because she's a trumpet player. So in the States, people like Fred Sienkiewicz at Vanderbilt and Kira Savransky in Utah, also Daniel Gianola Norris. They were sort of early participants in Anne Marie's training here in the States, which is through the Intermountain Suzuki Association in Salt Lake City. So Anne Marie would come over and teach students the Suzuki pedagogy. This goes back since Suzuki was started in how they certify their teachers and how they certify people to be what they need to be to teach in this pedagogy. So I had talked to Fred at ITG a little bit, and it just, this whole pedagogy and approach and getting trumpet students started a little younger was something that I was really interested in, because having been a university professor, by the time a student gets to me, if they have a fundamental issue with setup, embouchure, basic tone production, it's really difficult for me to fix it at that point. And so anything that helps younger students get set up to have the best possible sound and the best possible opportunities for success is something I'm all in on, because I have innumerable stories of embouchures that have showed up in my studio, and I'm like, okay, what am I going to do with this? And so I had also sort of been interested in this topic. I've done presentations at like TMEA, the Texas Music Educators Association conference, about beginners, how to start beginners, because I need the band directors to know that there are some ways that are better than others to get brass players, specifically trumpet, set up better for success. So I signed up to do the Book 1 training for Suzuki at the Intermountain Music Association, the Suzuki thing over that does a ton of teacher training. It's like teacher training for all of them, cello, violin, viola, all that. And my colleague here at A&M Corpus is a certified cello, Suzuki cello professor. And I have watched these little kids come in and out of her studio over the years, and I'm like, wow, they're 5 years old, and they can, I mean, the level of her students at a young age was always, way better than the sixth graders I was getting on trumpet. So when I heard they were looking at Suzuki for trumpet, I was like, okay, I have to see what this is about. So I went out to get trained Book 1. And before you do that, in the philosophy, you have to do this training called Every Child Can, which is sort of a tenet of the Suzuki philosophy. I did Every Child Can online. I did in-person Book 1 training with Anne Marie and Kira Savransky in Utah. And then there was like an online cohort as well. When you get started, you have to do at least one book in person, and I highly recommend the in-person training. It was absolutely fascinating to me, to be in a place where you have hundreds of Suzuki trained musicians. Now, starting out, the trumpet cohort was the smallest by far, and we were there with all these string players, but Kira's studio provided real life Suzuki trumpet students to train with there at their summer program. I can't say enough about Kira's studio that she's developed in Salt Lake. It's these kids are really fantastic, and they're not all the same. They're not all as developed, but that's the whole point of Suzuki, is that you meet the student where they are, you bring them up, to their level of comfort and accomplishment and pace, but every child can learn music. Every child can learn trumpet when you approach it with sort of a beautiful heart, as Suzuki would say. I just was hooked. I did that first training out there, and I was like, okay, I'm all in on this. I'm going to keep doing it. What's interesting to me is how much of it I can apply to my college students. I think it really goes to the heart of maybe some competitiveness that you find in trumpet studios and trumpet centric world that can be not as helpful when you're trying to develop a studio or the players in your studio. And the Suzuki approach, where everyone is working toward a musical goal and a success on trumpet goal, but that there's room designed and built in for everyone to kind of go at their own pace and learn the way they need to learn. Certain, we know this from teaching in general, but everybody learns kind of in a different way. But sometimes you find yourself in a trumpet studio where there is one way. And if you're the student that that doesn't really work for, there's a feeling of being left out in a way. Like it's just not working for you as that student. And I feel like for the littles, I think it's super important that they always feel like they are making their progress. Their progress is theirs. The other kids' progress is theirs. The learning is always fun and everyone has room to learn in their own way. And you get equipped with a lot of different ways to engage the younger students. And that's the other thing about the Suzuki philosophy is that it's very sharing among the teachers. I'm not trying to hide what works for me in my studio. I want to share it with everybody else's studio. And you'll find that the Suzuki trumpet teachers are super generous about, okay, here's this whole packet I put together. It works great for my students. I put some songs that I designed in here so you can play duets, and I added lyrics to help memorize. Here you go. It's not very territorial in sort of teaching methods. I think that's changing a little bit in the collegiate scene. People are a little more willing to talk about how they teach and what they teach and how they go about it. But for a long time, it wasn't really like that. It was like you had to be in X, Y, or Z studio so you would get that method of teaching, you know? And I just don't think that's healthy because everybody learns a different way. And if you've got something that's working great for your students, maybe to work great for someone else's students, you should share it. You know, ultimately, the students have to do the work. It's not going to be your method that made them the way they are. It's okay, they did the work using some of the tools I gave them. You may as well share your toolbox, you know? I think one of the things you'll find in the Suzuki pedagogy is its focus on tone and sound from the very beginning. And I think in a lot of band programs or, you know, schools where they're limited in the number of band directors they have, you might have a room full of 60 kids and you're the only person standing in front of them. How are you going to get to the back row to really see what your trumpets are doing on an individual basis, at least a couple times a week? You know, that's really difficult. So the Suzuki thing focuses on sound right away, getting people set up. There's so much auditory. You need to model the tone. The student gets the tone right away, and you're doing it when they're still at that age where sound is making this impact on their brains in a way that it will never again. You know, that's why young kids learn languages so well. It's all auditory input and replication on this sort of molecular level almost. And so I really like the idea of having trumpet students start earlier. I was skeptical like everybody else. How are you going to have a 4-year-old playing the trumpet? And I'm like, well, first off, you don't start with a trumpet. Step one. You know, any kid can play a mouthpiece. You can be 3, 4 years old and getting that set up so that you're creating a healthy buzz, you know, that's there's no size problem with that. There's not even a lung capacity issue with that. It's just, okay, how am I set up to really get that healthy sounding buzz? And so if that's what you do, just do it going up and down and telling stories. Oh, the waterfall. How do we make the waterfall go down with our buzz? You can spend as much time on that as you want. If you're waiting for the student to develop physically more or whatever, you can still be working on tone on just a mouthpiece. And then you might move to the shortcut, which is a small tube with a small bell. Joe Rao used to make them, and now you can 3D print them. And it's just a little plastic tube with a little bell. And that you're still working on tone, like the best sound from mouthpiece. That you can work on that for 6 months if you want to. But this engagement and listening and playing, you know, singing back and forth not related to notes on the page just yet, although reading can come in as early as you want. And then maybe a pocket trumpet when they're 5 or 6 years old and they can hold it and it's ready. And then you start dealing with the physicality of the three fingers. So there's plenty of room to make the pedagogy fit where the students are at. When I look back at my development as a trumpet player and I think about, okay, where is the stuff that I really missed out? It's all the development of the ear for me. I was attached to the music on the page so much, probably because of piano lessons, learning how to read music early on. That's how I approached the trumpet. It was about the printed page more than it was about me playing tunes or hearing a song and being able to play it back. And that really, I think, kind of holds up memorization. I am the worst memorizer of music. And virtually at this point, mid 50s, I'm not ever going to figure out how to really memorize music. Terry Everson gave a clinic at ITG a few years ago about memorization or whatever. And he said something in the room about how if you're over 50, the time has probably passed. And I was like, hallelujah, Terry Everson tells me I don't need to learn how to memorize music at this point. But if I had started Suzuki, I am 100% convinced that memorization would not be a thing for me. It would be easy. It's just built in. And to be perfectly honest, when I was looking at doing Suzuki training, that was my big fear because you're supposed to memorize everything in every book. And I'm certified through book 4 now. And I should tell you, I can confidently say I have book 1 memorized, but the rest of them so far, not yet. I just wanted to take all of this information, condense it down into like a 40-minute session that I could show at IWBC about, okay, this is what Suzuki looks like. This is how we sort of approach it. And here's a kid that's been studying Suzuki, and this is what he can do, and why Dan and I both think it's a fantastic thing. And so that's what this session was. I'm excited that it's a possibility for trumpet now. So I thought that will be my topic.
I'm so excited that Suzuki is finally reaching the trumpet world because I have always been fascinated with how these 3-year-old kids are playing violin, and it never made sense to me. But speaking of that, I do have a little follow-up question for you, which is why do you think it's taken so long for the Suzuki method to reach the brass instruments? And then also, what are some ways that you, as a Suzuki teacher, approach students who inevitably are going to reach those frustrations of brass playing, and how do you circumvent them if you do?
I think one of the reasons that people didn't get Suzuki started right away in the brass world has a lot to do with this notion of teeth and braces being a real problem. Kids lose their teeth, especially the front 2 teeth that, I don't know, 5-ish, 6-ish, maybe a little younger. I don't have kids, so I don't really know. What happens is that people would just say, well, if your teeth fall out, you can't play the trumpet. So they didn't want to start till after that. And that actually is not really, it turns out, a thing. Braces are still more of a challenge than the teeth falling out at a young age, but we had that challenge anyway. I think the other reason that, and this is just a theory that people may or may not agree with, but I think for so long, all of the trumpet teachers were male, that this notion of dealing with young children was just not something on the radar. They're just not, I'm not going to deal with 4 and 5-year-olds to teach trumpet. Having to deal with people that weren't even necessarily through grade school yet was not an attractive age group to work with. I think that that has improved quite a bit over the years. And so this idea of being able to start students younger and increase their potential for success has, sort of changed that. And I think also having models of people that are really good teachers of young students of all genders and all groups of people, this inclusivity notion that is part of Suzuki. Once you're in Suzuki, it is every child can, which you can translate to everybody can. You can learn and teach in this methodology and pedagogy. I find it to be very open and accepting of all different grade levels and all different styles of learners. And the other part of that is that parents are a big part of the Suzuki Triangle. When you're teaching these kids, their parents are supposed to be there in the room. They are learning along with your student so that then they can serve as a teacher also in the home. And when I say parent, it's whoever the adult is. It can be a grandparent or it doesn't have to be quote unquote mom and dad. It's just the person that's going to take you through Suzuki. So someone had to have the idea that you could develop a pedagogy and it could work and be willing to go through the hurdles of getting the Suzuki associations to recognize trumpet. And Anne Marie was the person that decided it had to happen. And so whatever happens with trumpet Suzuki pedagogy going forward, there's an enormous debt to Anne Marie for having put that all together and getting it started. It would not have happened without her.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for shouting out her and having this be sort of a tribute to her also, because like many other women mentors and pioneers, their names often get sort of forgotten. So I'm really glad that we get to highlight her here as well as you.
Well, Anne Marie, I always tell stories. She's an interesting person. And when you travel around and you meet people from all different places in the world, there's a very, in my opinion, a very sort of Swedish personality. I don't know how many Swedes you've come across in your life, but it was almost like as soon as I met her, my stepdad is Swedish. And as soon as I met her, I was like, you're Swedish. I can tell. Absolutely. And so she's just a smidge intimidating, but it's in a really good way. So I just think she's terrific. And the amount of time and effort she's put into this is really astonishing, actually.
I believe it. It always is, right?
Yep, 100%.
Well, I'd love to touch back on something you mentioned a little bit ago, which is how this pedagogy you apply sort of directly to your college age students.
Mhm.
Um, and so, someone who's teaching such a wide range of ages and skill levels, what do you think applies across those ages? What do you think doesn't apply, if there's anything? And then, what advice would you offer to other brass teachers who are navigating a situation like this where they're teaching multiple students of varying age and skill levels?
First off, I love it because it keeps me fresh on both ends of the spectrum. I would say one of the things that I don't use with my older students is my collection of Beanie Babies with the note names. So there's like cat and elephant and fish, and I use those for note names. I don't do that with my college kids. However, I will tell you one of the things that the Suzuki students love the most is the spinner idea. Like when you have to play one of the pieces from your book, you put them on a spinner and then they spin it, and whatever it lands on is the tune they have to play. Well, I have totally adopted this for my trumpet studio at the University for Scales, because your students are always like, of course you're going to ask me G flat major because that's a hard one and I don't know it. And I'm like, okay, let's use the spinner. So now I'll be having a studio class and I have the spinner on my iPad, and they are like the 4 and 5 year olds getting to spin the spinner. They're so excited. And then it's this sort of collective, I can't believe you got F major. That's just ridiculous. Who gets F major on the spinner? So I'm like, it's totally random. We'll just keep playing. All right. So there are engagement techniques that definitely run the gamut. The other thing about it is that I do a lot of back and forth call and response playing with my Suzuki students, and I've really started incorporating more of that with my college students as well. Twofold. One is I want to make sure that their ears are working, that they can do some by ear simple stuff. Lucky for them, a lot of the trumpet playing tradition here in South Texas is taught that way orally. All of the mariachi tradition and stuff like that, it's rarely written down. It's almost all taught call and response, that kind of thing. So it's rare for me to come across a student that can't play by ear at least as well as, if not way better than I do already when they come in here. But what they need to hear is the tone with which I'm playing the call and response. So I am not just testing their replication of the melody that I give them, but it's the tone quality. It's always about the sound, So if I play C, D, E, F, G, you're going to play those notes, of course, easy, but what did they sound like? And so modeling sound is the core of my Suzuki approach, and it's always sort of been the core of my older student approach as well. But sometimes when you're teaching at the college level, there's so much rep to get through, and you want your students to play a lot in their lessons so you can offer feedback or whatever. It's just good for me to remind myself, I got to make sure I'm playing enough that they get that model consistently in their lessons. So I usually do 5 or 10 minutes of duets at the end of a lesson if they've got their stuff together and have done well. And it's just a reminder to me that there needs to be a model there of the sound you want your students to have. So that is definitely something that carries over. And I think the other thing is that my colleague Whiff Rudd at Baylor, we talk a lot, he's very big on developing studio culture. And we've talked a lot over the years about how to develop your collegiate studio culture to be a positive place and for your students to be a positive influence on each other. And that is definitely a part of Suzuki pedagogy as well. And it's sort of built into the foundation there, because not only do your students have their, individual lessons with you and their parent, but there's a group lesson requirement that all the parents come to and the students are at. And so you have these group lessons where everyone plays, everyone plays in front of each other. And it's just an atmosphere that is about sharing and being positive, and yet having developed a way to take criticism that is presented in a way to help you, helpful criticism, And so I'm always working on developing that with my college kids. And the Suzuki is definitely helpful to that. It's just a sense of, okay, we all know we're going to play a tune off of the spinner. So let's buy in together. So those are some of the differences and similarities. And I also think that for me personally, the important thing about the Suzuki thing is, okay, I'm 30 years into having taught trumpet lessons of one kind or another. You're always learning better and better how to be a great teacher, but engaging with the systematic approach to beginning sounds and how to ingrain a beautiful sound into your students, no matter when you get them. It was just kind of nice to have sort of a fresh look at that. A lot of times you feel in lessons at any age, you're trying to communicate a lot, but you're not quite sure what is making it across, into the other person's brain. And so sometimes the intentional simplicity of the Suzuki ideas being condensed down into the simplest form, I borrow that and I use it with my college kids, and I'm like, oh, well, that worked better.
I just think that's such a wonderful, sort of beautiful mindset to have, this idea of every child matters and every child can. I think that the trumpet world is way too competitive and harsh. So thank you for being a leader in this collaborative and welcoming environment. I think that that's so necessary, especially right now in this day and age. So
the teacher that I had for the Every Child Can session, which was online, there were about 20 of us in this online class, and I was the only trumpet player. We were talking about how to teach in Suzuki. And one of the exercises they put you through in this class is one half of the class gets the notes on the page, and it's some sort of non-real language. And you get the notes on the page, and you're supposed to teach each other and work together how to perform what you see, right? And then the other half of the group gets the same written instructions about how to perform this piece as the first group and what it looks like, but they also get a recording. So you do this thing, and you've got the group with just written instructions, and you've got the group that has the recording to listen to as well. And so, of course, you're making a point about Suzuki and oral training, but we get the group back together, and we performed ours and they performed theirs. And of course, ours was much closer to the desired product. And so the teacher went around the room and she said, so tell me what you noticed about this, side-by-side approach to learning. And I thought I was going to be funny and I was going to make a joke. And I said, well, I don't want to inject too much of the trumpet personality to this class, but I'd say we kicked their butts, right? And the teacher was like, now in the Suzuki world, we don't like to talk. And I said, I know, that's just a joke. But it is truly something that they talk about in this idea that a competitiveness you can have sort of a healthy approach to wanting everyone to get better as quickly as they can, but at their own pace. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I just had to interject a little trumpet humor to the afternoon. And I was like, oh, they take that seriously.
What a trumpet player thing to do, but it's so relatable too, you know.
Right?
If you're okay, I'd love to switch the conversation to talking a little bit about the future. In that, we're living in a constantly evolving musical environment and landscape. And as someone who has quite an extensive career in lots of different performance and teaching avenues, I'm wondering what advice you have for students who hope to build a sustainable career in music going forward.
Well, prognosticating the future these days is a bit of a challenge. But I've always sort of said the same thing over the years, and that is you want to be able to do as many things as possible as a trumpet player. So when I was coming up, I came up pretty thoroughly as, okay, I'm being trained to be an orchestral trumpet player. When I started my collegiate career, I only played in orchestra. I was never a wind ensemble person. I was never a jazz band person. I was a symphony orchestra person. What I found is that 30 years ago, that might have been okay. It's not okay anymore. And I find myself like, I wish I could do jazz better. I wish I could do commercial music better. I wish I could arrange pieces better. I wish I knew how to edit my own videos better than a third grader. I wish I understood which microphones make me sound the best. All of these things are things that I think trumpet students today need to be learning about while they're in school, and they are in some cases where they have access, where they have encouragement. So we have a music industry program now here that we've started at the school, and we were just talking about curriculum changes the other day. So rather than having a specific course in form and analysis, which is, a 25-plus-year-old model, we're changing it to orchestration and arranging so that our students can take some piece they heard and they want it for their brass quintet, or they want to arrange something for when they go out in their band and it turns out they only have 16 kids in there and 12 of them play drums. Okay, what am I going to arrange to make this work for my band? And so, making opportunities available for students to be properly prepared for an ever-changing career path, whether they're an educator, performer, or whatever, a combination thereof. That's the other thing. Everything is a combination these days. I'm a performer, but I'm also a teacher. And I'm also someone that has to record myself. And especially during COVID, I was like one of those people scrambling around trying to set up like a home studio because, the orchestras would call and say, hey, we want to put out some video features so we don't go bankrupt. Can you record something in your living room? Maybe I'll give it a shot. All of these tools are what I at least want my students to know about, but even better, get a little training in. And that includes teaching. Not every kid that comes through your studio has any idea how to teach a trumpet lesson. You need to talk to them about that because whether you're playing, principal trumpet in the Cleveland Orchestra or you're teaching at a local high school or you are teching for a DCI group or whatever, you are going to be teaching. So we need to be sure that our students who may not think they're ever going to teach, they need to know how to do it. I am a fan of a few times during a semester having what I call like a duo lesson. So I'll have two of my students come in and I'll sort of have it operate as though, okay, you're the teacher today, teach your colleague how to make this better. And I'm in the room and I'm sort of facilitating, but you need to know what it's like to be the person that has to come up with something to say to make it better. The more tools you have in your toolbox, the more successful you're going to be. I'm not saying you don't need to be at a high level at least a few of those. I mean, if you think you're going to go out and get a symphony orchestra job, you need to be real about what those numbers look like and how many trumpet players are playing at an incredibly high level. Same thing for a collegiate teaching career. I have students all the time and I say, well, what is it you want to do? I want to have a job like yours. And I'm always like, good luck, in the best possible way. But here's what you need to do. One of my teachers, and all of a sudden I'm trying to remember if it was Dave Bilger or Jim Wilt, one of the two of them was like, there's always room for great players at the top. That was what they said. Now, keep in mind, that was 30 years ago. I don't know that that's the case. I know an awful lot of really fantastic, great players that are struggling. And that's why I think it's important to know about, okay, if I want to be the person doing sound for a live stream to help somebody out at a concert they're giving downtown or a quintet at this church or whatever, do I know how to do that? Can I be the person that gets hired to do that? I have a lot of music friends that are very successful facilitating live streams. That may not be their main gig, but it's another way to put money in the bank. Or am I going to be the person that arranges all those brass quintet tunes for those quintets that are gigging all over the place on churches on Sunday? Am I going to be the person that writes the descants so that that quintet can play and they want to have them back every Sunday because it adds so much? So you got to be hustling all the time. And the way to hustle the best is to have skills that can help you be marketable. Whether you're looking to get that tenure track teaching job or the high school gig, or you're continuing to take the orchestra auditions, you have to work hard at all of it. And so you better like it. That's the thing. I have that conversation with my students as well. If you don't enjoy practicing and you don't enjoy working hard and you don't enjoy thinking about things that are going to make you look better to a potential employer of any kind, then you should probably rethink what career area you're in. There's nothing wrong with switching to something else, but you need to balance what's going to make you happy with what's going to allow you to make a living and find that sweet spot. I mean, if someone had asked me coming out of university, what do you think your career is going to be exactly? As a matter of fact, this was an exercise that we did do in my studio, my undergraduate studio. And it was like, okay, write down your goals, 3 months, a year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, right? Something like that. And I remember that like my goal, sort of the 5-year mark in there, whatever it was, to have a trumpet job on the coast, right? Now, in my mind at the time, I was thinking, okay, Boston Symphony, San Francisco Symphony, something like that. Well, the fact of the matter is that I have a trumpet job on the coast. I'm on the Gulf Coast of America. I teach the trumpet and I play with a bunch of regional orchestras. So in fact, I have done what I had on my list. When I talked about that flexibility in your definition of success, that is super important. And it's something that I share on the regular because I came up thinking, all right, I have to have an orchestra job that pays all my bills. And that's what my teachers did. That's what I'm going to do. That's how I'm going to make my way. And if I don't do that, I'm a big giant failure, right? So I spent years, kind of with this thing in the back of my mind, like, golly, I never did what I set out to do. I'm a total failure, right? That is really stupid. What's that quote? That comparison is the thief of joy. I believe that to be true. It was reminded to me not that long ago. I had a guest lecturer come in to talk to our music students about mental health and staying in a healthy, balanced place in your psyche. There was question and answers at the end, and one of the students asked this question, basically like, how am I supposed to feel like I'm a success when I'm just here and I don't have a big job, I'm not famous, I'm not ever going to be Wynton Marsalis or whatever. I said, excuse me, would you let me answer that question to our artist? And she said, sure. And I said, you gave yourself your answer in your question. The thing is you are here. The people you interact with, the people that you are teaching, the people that you are helping need you. Wynton Marsalis is never going to be here. So that's not really helpful to anybody, right? But you are in a community of 600,000 people, and there are however many thousands of students enrolled in CCISD schools. You are the person that is here. So you being as great as you can be and teaching these students is really, really important. If you do that, you are successful. There is validity and value and worth in that for not just you, but for everybody around you. And it's silly to give that away and to say it's not valuable because you may not know it now. The students may not know it now, but they will know it. And then those are the people that are going to come back to you 30 years from now and say, I just wanted to tell you how much it meant for you to help me with whatever when I was 17, 15, 12, 5. When you are in this particular kind of business, remembering that what you do is worthwhile and beneficial and contributes in a real meaningful way to making this like a better world and one we want to live in is super valuable, especially in this time when there's a never ending media, politically driven drive to diminish the worth of these things. Anyone that has experienced the positives of music and the arts and creativity and collaboration and working together, anybody that has experienced this at any point in their lives knows that it's true and knows that it's valuable and knows that it needs to be supported. And so, as much as the message in the ethos these days is negative, we have to fight back with all of the positive messaging and all of the real life examples we have of why what we do is important. And I'm not just talking about music, I'm talking about education and reading and writing and thinking thoughts that are based upon fact and written word and truth. And it's our job to use our skills to get that message out. And that's the other job I try to teach my students. You have to be an advocate. You have to be an advocate for the arts, for music, for education, for collaboration, for sharing, for everyone being welcome everywhere. And it's particularly important in the state of Texas, where I am. You are going to have to do it for the rest of your life. And you may as well just get on the train now because it's your job. If you want this career path and kind of life to be available to people after you, you have to do the work.
What a beautiful and accurate statement for what is happening in the world today. And once again, just thank you for being such a pioneer of that welcoming arts forward thinking mindset. I think it's so necessary right now. And also thank you for leading me basically directly into my next question, which is can you give your sentiment or advice to those listening who may feel underrepresented or unwelcome, especially in the brass world?
My first message is always keep at it. You just have to keep doing the work. There will always be people throwing up roadblocks. And so, as frustrating as it can be, part of our work is finding the ways around those roadblocks and holding a hand out to the people after us and alongside us that maybe don't have as much access or opportunity. Think about who it is you're going to invite to do something with you. Think about how it is you can affect change in your little part of the world, because when all those little parts get put together, you have in fact changed the world, right? So, I mean, some ideas, just things that I've been a part of that I encourage and that I try to get people think about doing as much as possible is when it comes to the repertoire we play and the music we play, I'm a big fan of commissions, giving opportunities to composers that are new and different. And I mean that in every sense of the word. So I know that like Ashley Killam and Carrie Blosser's Diversify the Stand projects, I've been involved with those. And we've started a festival here. I think this is either year 8 or 9, maybe a Soundwaves Festival. And so we look to bring in a composer that represents new voices and new ages, and we bring them to Corpus, and we have sort of a 3 to 4 day festival where we focus on their music and they work with our students and they talk about the commissioning process. So we've had people like Rena Esmail. We're going to have Gala Flagello this year, Royden C., Lauren Bernofsky. So composers that are what we are hoping to see more of, right? And giving them a platform. You might think that, oh, that's just a little thing. That's not really going to matter. That's not going to change anything. But it's all those little things that add up. If you just decide nothing is worthwhile unless it's like a big splashy, if I don't get this composer to get, a $200,000 commission from the New York Philharmonic, it's not going to count. That's backwards. It's all of the commissions that lead up to that happening, right? I think about pyramids, and we are the first couple levels of pyramids. There has to be a lot at that initial level, and gradually you'll get some of your people up to the pinnacle, right? You have to get yourself separated from the money part of it in a way. And this is what I find where I'm leading a department now. It's like when you're looking at budgets and you're looking at fundraising, administrators of any kind, whether it's a university or a nonprofit or whatever, they're always like, well, is that going to make any money? You have got to find a way for that not to be the first question. And I don't care what the answer is or how you get to the point where that isn't the first question. The question needs to be, is this going to be valuable for the goals we're trying to achieve? If your goal is to represent different musics, different people, different tastes, a diverse experience for your patrons, that money question can't be first. There's one of two ways about it. You get people to support you through grants and grassroots fundraising that may or may not appeal to a wide swath of people. $50 from 100 people is still better than, 5,000 of the wrong kind of dollars from one person. In my time in education and the orchestra world and stuff like this, I think this is one of our biggest problems is that people have lost what it means to be a nonprofit organization. That means that what we do is not supposed to be for profit. It's just supposed to be so that we get an outcome that is beneficial to our people, to our social group, to our society, right? And you've got all these CEO types, business people now, whether it's education or the arts in general, running nonprofit organizations. And literally the first words out of their mouth will be something like, well, how much money are we going to make doing this? And I cannot tell you how many meetings I've been in where I say, this is a nonprofit organization. It is in the title. You have 501c3 status. The whole point is that we don't make money, right? We just need to cover costs and decide that this project or whatever it is we're trying to do is valuable for reasons beyond money, right? And so I think there's a real need for young musicians and people coming up to understand the sort of conversations that you're going to end up having to have with people that do have the money to help you do things. How can I speak to them in a way that they understand the value of what we're doing, even if it's not something that generates what they would perceive as a profit? You have to be able to talk about the benefits and why these projects can help our local community or our broader society in general, or what it's going to contribute to the human condition, for crying out loud. That's another thing, actually. I was just talking to my friend, Natalie Mannix, who's just retired from UNT. She went and got her MBA. And I think, that's not a half bad idea to learn how to speak that business language when you're advocating for arts programs and arts funding. It doesn't hurt, I mean, it's not like I have time to go off and get an MBA, but you can learn these things through experience. Well, be the person that wants to represent, the players committee in your regional orchestra. Be the person that wants to sit on that committee in academia for budget planning so you can ask these questions and point these things out in your academic setting. Be the person that knows how to go out into the community to solicit funding for your projects, with or without their blessing sometimes, because we in music, theater, dance, fine arts, we are most effective at speaking to what it is we do. Our our notions of why what we do is important are far more crystallized. A lot of times we're pretty good at sending that message to the people we're talking to about supporting the work, right? If you go through all of the channels in any bureaucracy, that message gets diluted and it's not as effective. So I think artists, speaking to people in support of their own work directly is really, most of the time, highly effective. I mean, there are certainly artists that probably probably shouldn't be talking to the people that we're trying to get to support their work, but you can use some discernment and figure out who's going to be best at that sort of messaging, you know. But having those skills, how to advocate for your work in a way that includes money, that's super important. Holistically, it's going to become a more important part of artists' lives from here on out. I mean, certainly for the rest of my lifetime.
It's a new evolving world, and like you said, advocacy, I think, is going to be a huge part of it. So it's very important to learn those skills right away as much as you can. I just have one more question for you, which is kind of sad. This has been such a great interview. It's been so nice to get to know you. So thank you so much for your time and your great responses. But this last question is super open-ended, so it doesn't have to be about music or trumpet. It can be about whatever you want. Time and money aside, what is your dream project?
So, in terms of dream project, one of the things I would like to do here, actually in Corpus, is start a community music school in conjunction with the university, maybe, or independently. Because what there are, of course, there's community music schools all over the country, right? Taking a community music school that embraces sort of local musical culture more specifically than sort of the traditional classical musical structure, making sure that we have both represented in the community music school is sort of this idea I have. Because, you know, the mariachi and Tejano and, you know, conjunto and all these sort of South Texas musics, I think they're super important to our community. And if we engage those musical styles along with sort of the traditional classical music education approach, I think something really magical at that young age, and then having a Suzuki wing of that so that you would have sort of the indigenous music of this region, your classical music, and a Suzuki pedagogy combined together in a system where it crosses all of the sort of socioeconomic barriers. So what I'd want is that students from every end of the socioeconomic scale that we have here, which is extremely wide in my area, all be together in this community music school, learning all of the musical styles of this area in a way. So it would include those four that I talked about. And then having our students be teachers in that program from the university. You know, that's sort of my dream project right now. My colleague, who's the Suzuki cello professor, and, you know, a couple of other, our jazz band director and stuff, you know, we want to figure out a way to make it economically feasible. So you're talking about maybe a combination of private, city, and the university funding is a problem right now, but, you know, maybe a combination of those kind of three things could help make something like that happen. We have a church downtown that has a school that's no longer being used, so there's space there. So this sort of collaborative approach to a community music school, I think would be really awesome. When you put this time and effort into these projects, you want to figure out a way to make it sustainable. And that's probably the biggest challenge. It's always possible to get money to get something started. It's much harder to get money to keep something going. And so you have to figure out a way to have maybe a sliding scale of tuition or enough years of a funding to help you find a way to have it established through grants or something like that. But, you know, it's a big project. And so I have to figure out time to do it. But that would be a dream project. That, and I also want to go to Antarctica. But, you know,
Well, talk about two very different dreams.
right?
But that would be amazing going to Antarctica. I mean, gosh, what an experience.
I just say thanks for giving me time to wax philosophical every once in a while. It's good for me. I have loved being a part of IWBC and organizations like IWBC and ITG, which is ever evolving and improving, are really valuable, but they only work when the people that are in them want to do the work, you know. So I appreciate people like you being willing to take the time and help out with IWBC and make that kind of organization successful. And I encourage anyone who might see this podcast that isn't a member of IWBC to sign up, because that's the power is in the people, you know?
100%. Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to this episode of IWBC's Brass Flexibilities. My name is Amy Batchelder, and it has been my pleasure to host and edit today's interview with our esteemed guest, Dr. Mary Thornton. A special thank you to our wonderful producer, Dr. Lauren Rudzinskas, and the members of Monarch Brass, who you can hear in the intro and outro music performing IWBC's 2025 commission, Rise. To learn more about IWBC and how to get involved, please visit our website, myiwbc.org, or our social media pages. If you would like to be featured on the podcast or know someone you'd like us to interview, please reach out anytime using the email info@myiwbc.org. You can stream this podcast on all major podcasting platforms as well as our YouTube page and social media. You can support IWBC via donation, volunteering, or attending our holiday brass concerts in St. Louis, Missouri and Baltimore, Maryland. See you in the next episode of Brass Flexibilities.